Welcome to worship during the coronavirus. I'm glad you have chosen to worship God this day. When we started videotaping messages 3 weeks ago, we initially thought we had an 8-minute time limit. Turns out we have a little more flexibility, yet I've heard good feedback on the shorter length. Today's sermon is a continuation of the series of persons that I have learned a great deal from in my life. This morning you will meet Scotty. Scotty's story requires an additional 4 minutes. I beg your indulgence. Jesus' words from the Sermon on the Mount, from the 7th chapter of Matthew. Jesus said, "Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you also will be judged." Scotty talked incessantly. He was a great, big, huge man. He could literally corner you at the supermarket and sort of hold you captive for 15, 20 minutes. What made matters worse was what came out of his mouth was gibberish. It didn't make much sense. He was always complaining, and he would jump from one thing to another, to another, to another. The general consensus in the community was there wasn't much there. Now, Scotty was married to one of the most beautiful women of faith that I've ever known in my life, Donna. Donna was a devout member of the Greenville United Methodist Church, my very first appointment. About 6 months before I was appointed there, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. She was given a year to live. She ended up living almost 2 years, and so I got to know her for about a year and a half. It was during that time that I would visit her in her home, and that's where I met Scotty, because Scotty never darkened the door of the church. When Donna could no longer drive herself to church, Scotty would drive her. He drove a mustard yellow Impala. It was the ugliest car I'd ever seen in my life. Church started at 11, and Scotty would drive Donna to church. He'd get out, and he'd go to Don's drive-in. You could always tell what he had for lunch because it would be splattered down the front of his shirt. When he came back at about 12:30 to pick up Donna, he would sit on the horn until she came out of fellowship time. You see, Scotty didn't care. He didn't care about his appearance. He didn't care what people thought about him. Scotty didn't care, period. At the end of Donna's funeral, being a young pastor wanting to do everything right, I went up to Scotty and I said, "Scotty, I'd really like to come by and see you." And even as I said those very inauthentic words, I wanted to reach out and grab him and pull him back, but it was too late. He was nodding his head. And he pointed at me, he said, "You come by. Yes, you come by." So what I did next was procrastinate. And I put it off. 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Finally, about 10 weeks after the funeral, I decided I just want to get this over with. So I got in the car and I headed out to Donna and Scotty's house, which is about 4 miles out of town. You turn off the main road onto this long, quarter-mile-long driveway. And as I pulled onto this long driveway, a beautiful thought came to my mind. Maybe Scotty won't be home. And I'll leave my little calling card, and I'll write, "Scotty, came by to see you like I said I would. Sorry I missed you, Pastor Dave." But of course, as I pulled up to the house, there was Scotty's car, the mustard yellow Impala. And I thought to myself, of course he's home. He doesn't have any friends. I rang the doorbell, and he invited me in, and my already incredibly low opinion of Scotty dropped about 3 notches as I stepped in the house, which was a horrible mess. I had been in the house many times, and it was always immaculate. And I realized, as Donna was dying of cancer, Scotty wasn't taking care of her. She was taking care of him. And my anger just burned. Scotty plopped down on this great big green overstuffed chair, and he pointed to the couch, and as soon as I sat on the couch, it was like a volcano that was building pressure week after week after week, and he just erupted. He just erupted. He just started talking 100 miles an hour, complaining about how the mortuary had ripped him off, how Donna's life insurance check hadn't arrived yet, and he just talked 100 miles an hour. And after 30 minutes, I just left. Now, I didn't physically leave. I was still sitting on the couch, but I was elsewhere in my mind. I was thinking about the A's game that night. I was thinking about Sunday's sermon, and on he talked. After about an hour, I figure I had done my time, and I started to plan my escape. And so I waited for just a little pause, and then I jumped in. "Scotty, just come by." No, he rolled right over me. So another 10 minutes, or he went by, and I said, and there was a little pause, and I jumped in. "Scotty, just came by." No, he flattened me again. By now it was about an hour and a half. And so I got ready a third time, and And there was a little pause, and I jumped in. Scotty, say goodbye to say how you doing. And then something really bizarre happened. Scotty stopped talking, and there was silence. And in the silence, our eyes met, and we were looking right at each other. It's the first time I had ever looked at Scotty, with Scotty looking right back at me. And it was like he was looking right into me. What happened next sounded just like this. I don't know if you know, but I grew up Amish. Now, when I heard that, I thought to myself, it almost sounded like he said, I don't know if you know, but I grew up Amish. But I knew there was no possibility in the world that that could have been what I heard, because there wasn't a religious bone in this guy's body. But then he said, I'm third generation Amish. The next hour was among the most memorable and rich hours of my life, as Scotty articulated the culture and the beliefs and the theology of growing up Amish and his whole experience of what that was like. He was more articulate than any seminary professor that I've ever had. And after describing that world, describing how there were cultural Amish, and then there were devout, and his family was a devout. How, as the oldest male, as the oldest son, he had responsibilities as a spiritual leader that he took extremely serious, and how he was zealous about his faith, how Jesus Christ was the most important person in his life. As he described this world, he then said, however, when I was 17 years old, I rebelled. I rebelled against my family. I rebelled against the faith. Most importantly, I rebelled against God. And he said, I ran away. I ran away about as far as an Amish boy could run. It was 1942, and I enlisted in the Navy, and I became a warrior. That was his word, a warrior. He said, I served for the next year, and then in the fall of 1943, I finished my time, and I was released in San Diego, California. And I met Donna at a USO dance. She was the most beautiful woman in the world. And then he got up and he lumbered into the bedroom, and he came back with a framed photograph, and it was a stunningly attractive couple on their wedding day, and I can immediately tell the woman was Donna. But the man in the picture, in the military uniform, bore absolutely no resemblance to the Scotty that I thought I knew. Scotty said, that's our wedding picture in December of 1943. He said, at that time, I had finished my commitment. But he said, I re-upped. And he said, I volunteered for an amphibious unit, and I was trained to be an assassin. Now, again, that was his word. He said, over the last year of the war, he said, as our ships came across the Pacific, as we came to an island controlled by the Japanese, he said they would have individual Japanese soldiers as lookouts around the island. He said, and 3 of us, individually on rubber rafts under the cover of darkness, we would go and we would take out the lookouts. He said they called me the piano man because I used a piano wire. And then he held up his hands and he said, I killed 32 human beings with my hands. He said when the war was over, I got back to San Diego in the fall of 1945. He said, everybody was celebrating, but I could not celebrate. He said in the bathroom of the Greyhound bus station, I took off my uniform. I took all my uniforms, all my medals, and I was highly decorated, and put them in a brown paper bag. And I scrunched up the top, and I put it in the bottom of a garbage can, and I turned, and I walked away. And he said, I have never told a single human being until today. But you asked me how I was doing. He said, I know that there was a war. I know that I was doing what I was trained to do. He said, I knew that those persons that I killed certainly would have killed me in return had they had the opportunity. He said, I know all that. But you see, I was Amish. I was a pacifist. That's what I believed. And yet I did what I did. And I did it again and again and again and again. And then he held up those hands And he looked at those cans as if he could see something that I couldn't see. And he said, there's blood on my hands. There's blood on my hands that God can never, ever, ever, ever wash away. I had many additional conversations with Scotty. While I did nothing to deserve it, he nonetheless opened up and shared with me a part of his life that had been completely masked by 40 years of pain, guilt, and shame. He had an incredible intelligence that I was privileged to come to see. Rarely does a week pass that I don't think of Scotty and his pain and anguish, his tormented soul. He taught me many things. One of the things he taught me was the consequences of judging others. Jesus tells us not to judge, but from Scotty I learned 2 reasons why Jesus teaches us not to judge. First, my judgment of Scotty was completely wrong. I was wrong. He was not the person I judged him to be. I was wrong by 1,000,000 miles. When we judge, we get it wrong 100% of the time. We simply cannot judge another human being. Only God can judge. Second, my judgment of Scotty resulted in erecting a great barrier of separation. Because of my judgment, I tuned him out. And the only reason that changed, the only reason, was that he heard my inauthentic words. I just came by to see how you're doing, and chose to respond as if they had been authentic. I did nothing to deserve what he gave to me. It was a gift of grace from God and from Scotty. All of us know how incredibly painful it is to be judged by others. It's among the most painful experiences in life. What Jesus says is that the judgment we experience from others is directly related to our judgment of others. Together they create a barrier of separation. This is exactly what Jesus' words describe. Hear them again. Jesus says, "Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you also will be judged." Amen.